I am a consultant at Mylona McBroom. I'm going to be here tonight mostly in the capacity of moderating the Zoom and helping make sure people are able to participate and hear everything correctly. This meeting is being recorded. So everyone is going to be muted for this first portion of the meeting. The plan is to have about a 45-minute presentation followed by about 45 minutes of Q&A and discussion. If you are able to use the different Zoom tools at the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that says chat. If you have any issues or challenges hearing or anything else using the Zoom over the course of the meeting, feel free to use that chat to write to me. You should be able to select who you're writing to, and you can select me, Noah Slovin. I am listed as the host. And if you have any other issues, actually that's it for now. So let me just make sure that I went over everything. I'll note that the presentation and the discussion are both going to be recorded, so you'll be able to watch this again later if you miss anything or have any other trouble with that. So with that, I'll pass things off to Bill Hurley, the engineering manager for the town.
Okay, thank you, Noah. Can you hear me? Good. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rooster River Watershed Flood Mitigation Assessment Public Informational Meeting. My name is Bill Hurley, engineering manager for the town of Fairfield. I met many of you at the previous workshops that were held. I wanted to let everyone know that Brenda Kupchik, Fairfield's first select woman, is unable to attend due to a family commitment. So we can just get right started. This meeting, as Noah alluded to, would be recorded, and the presentations will be available via the link, the website, or even Fair TV. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to watch the presentation again, or if you have friends who missed it. We can go to the next. I guess we'll just do a little bit of the agenda here. The project history. I'll be doing that. Feasibility study will be from our friends, our consultants there at Mylona McBroom, James Murick. Conceptual designs will follow, and then at the end we'll have the next steps of what's in the future and questions and comments. Period for anybody listening. As Noah said, you can use the chat box, and that way it'd be a lot more organized, and we can call on people or at least rephrase their questions so everyone knows. September 25th, 2018, the severe rain event. It caused the 100-year plus flooding throughout Fairfield. It was worst along the Rooster River corridor. In Fairfield, it rained anywhere from 2 to 6 inches in a 4.5 hour period. You can tell the bullseyes there on the screen at the northern Fairfield, Bridgeport, and Trumbull got hit really hard, and it was even 6 to 8 inches at the headwaters of the Rooster River. The next slide here shows the flooding that occurred at the Fairchild Wheeler Golf Course. As you can see, quite a lot. I don't know if this picture was after. I believe it was after, so it probably, if we had gotten a picture of the exact rain event, it would even be worse than this. But it just gives you an idea of how much water had occurred just from runoff, and this is even at the headwaters of the Rooster River. This picture here shows that even when pipes or culverts are designed for the larger storms, debris from residential yards, streets, woods, and commercial areas can clog these structures and cause additional flooding. The townwide flooding in excess of 100-year events. Here's a sample list. It's not limited to these neighborhoods. The flooding reported in these neighborhoods ranged from yard, basement, garage, and even first floor flooding due to the storm that occurred for all the residential properties in the area. Going along the timeline, this is just a quick recap, just to let people know that even though we haven't had a meeting in quite a while, the project has not been stagnant. It's been moving along. Just a little recap here is we had our first public meeting with the neighborhoods of Bennett, Bond, and Little Allen. The second meeting we had was with the Lynbrook group. We had a Board of Selectmen presentation soliciting design funds. On January 17th, two things actually happened. One here is we contracted Malone and McBroom to perform a feasibility study for the detention, and just to see if any of we had picked 7 sites, just to see if they had any feasibility or any potential for detention areas. We also, that same day, held the Rooster River workshop at the Board of Education there at 501 Kings Highway, where over 100 people attended. You may recall that one. Next was the feasibility study was completed, and with that, we were able to present it to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the RTM, where we were able to get funding to advance it into the next design stage. And that pretty much takes you up to today in terms of our 4th public presentation. I just wanted to highlight, though, this was a quick timeline. We have actually 20 items in the timeline since the storm. I'll just highlight a couple of ones that, just to let people know if they didn't know occurred behind the scenes. November 20th, 2018, Fairfield, Bridgeport, and the Mountain Grove Cemetery signed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding for debris removal and cleanup. That one picture that we just showed you with all the clogged debris and stuff, well, if anyone drove by the Rooster River bridge there on Route 1 North Avenue, Kings Highway, right by the Mountain Grove Cemetery, there was literally dumpsters full of debris. And there was an old porta-john that got washed down. There was basketballs. There was yard furniture, tons of trees, leaves, trunks, all sorts of debris that also clogged up the river and prevented the water from getting out quick. So the town did do that work with the city of Bridgeport and the Mountain Grove Cemetery. And so that project worked out well. And we were able to remove all that debris soon after we had signed that memorandum. So during the fall, DPW and its contractors cleaned pipes. Back in March of 2019, we hired a consultant to clean pipes and video storm system in the Casimir Bennett Bond area. We've done some of the cleaning there, but still some has to still occur. There's an old shopping cart that we have to try to figure out a way. Somehow it got into the system. We got to try to figure out a way to get that one out. We had also some neighborhood involvement. I hope he doesn't mind. Keith Bradley, he had led a small volunteer group for Rooster River cleanup back in May of 2019. The DPW assisted where they collected whatever they could, brought it out to the roadside, and the town was able to pick it up and dispose of it. He and his group there showed that they care. And what was interesting is this was mainly in the area of Lynbrook, and a lot of the volunteers didn't even live in that neighborhood. So that just shows you that there is some public buy-in here trying to resolve this problem, and any efforts like this are always appreciated. And then we also, even just as recently as last month, we still continue a dialogue with the town of Trumbull and the city of Bridgeport whenever we're reviewing major projects. The residents at Maine was one big one in Trumbull. We ensured that they were having a no net increase, and we actually got them to reduce between 5 and 10% of the runoff with their proposal. So I just wanted to highlight some of the things that people might not realize have been going on behind the scenes. So I think with that, I think I can hand it off to our consultants from Malone and McBroom. Jim, oh, actually, I'm sorry. There's one other thing on our timeline. And then again, it just shows you that we'll have another meeting sometime in 2021 to discuss whatever occurs from this meeting and further detailed designs. And then just to let everybody know that when that detailed design comes into play, we're going to have to look for permitting, obtaining funding, and then ultimately we have a contract with Malone and McBroom to do bidding and construction documents to go out to bid, and then the eventual construction. So we're going to try to fast track that as soon as we can, but also realize sometimes, again, depending on the project, and we don't have to do them all at once. So even though we have a 2 or 3 year window, certainly the smaller projects or ones that don't impact the wetlands as much, obviously we could get them done sooner than others. So with that, Jim, take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Bill. You guys hear me okay? Thumbs up? All right, good. So my name is Jim Murak. I'm a professional engineer and a certified floodplain manager and a senior engineer in the Water Resources Group of Malone and McBroom. I've been involved with this project since about last year, since early to mid 2019, and was approached by the town to get involved in looking at how we could address flooding in the Rooster River watershed. Our contract was pretty specific in that we were looking at detention throughout the Rooster River watershed area. But for a lot of you out there who maybe don't know how we jumped to that, let's say, arrived at that conclusion, I kind of wanted to just give a little bit of a background of why the watershed's flooding and why detention makes the most sense at this stage. So I'm just going to flip through these slides and kind of give us a quick breakdown of where this water is coming from and ways we would typically be able to deal with it. In the Rooster River, it's a very urban watershed. It's been historically developed quite densely over the, since even the 50s and 60s. So there's a lot of impervious surfaces. There's roofs, there's parking lots, roads, and driveways, which don't infiltrate water into the ground the same way that woods and leaves and grass do. Back before there was development here, rainwater that would fall on a wooded area would infiltrate into the ground, and it would slowly make its way to a brook, which would make its way to a river, which would take hours or days. Now with driveways and roofs and roadways, that same water is hitting the pavement, running off immediately, and arriving in these brooks in minutes. So these brooks were never large enough to handle that amount of water that quickly. So the development in high impervious area is one huge factor in causing flooding. Aging stormwater infrastructure is another. If a lot of this development is from the 50s and 60s, and that means all the infrastructure is as well. That's bridges, culverts, stormwater, catch basins, pipes, manholes, all of these things have a service life. Typically 50 years is an engineering service life for some of these structures. As they age, they require maintenance, or they become insufficient for current design trends, such as increased precipitation, which is my number 4 bullet. We know that precipitation is increasing in severity and in frequency, and many of our infrastructure just was simply not designed for that. When we built infrastructure in the 60s, we were using rainfall data from the 1910s. Now we're in the 2020, so we're looking and trying to figure out how to go forward and take some of the changing climate trends into account when we design our modern day infrastructure. And the last one, and the most important one to tonight's discussion here, is the over-encroachment of floodplains. So rather than talk about it, I have this slide that can animate a little, or just show sort of the progression of how a natural floodplain is typically developed in an urban area. So in the top left, you'll see a normal floodplain in the middle of the Catskills in the untouched woods area with vegetation on both sides. You have a wide floodplain bench that's very connected to the closer river channel itself, and that any time the water rises ever so slightly up to its banks, it goes out on this wide flat floodplain with all this vegetation and loses all of that energy. It's very spread out. It's very all of the energy is wasted on that floodplain. When you start filling in that floodplain and start building in that floodplain, you're now concentrating that water and that energy into deeper, faster channels. So now, and which is also going to, it's just the same as when you sit down in a full bathtub and your body displaces that water, well, now you're displacing that water, which causes the water surface to rise. If you continue with that trend, it just becomes more extreme. As you start building walls on the sides, you're displacing more and more water that used to go and spread out. And then if you channelize this one illustrates a concrete liner on the channel. This doesn't happen all the time, but a lot of, in the 1950s, the Army Corps loved putting rivers in concrete channels. It's just one more worsening. And then finally, putting it into a culvert, burying it underground completely is the final step. And you can see at each step, the same house that maybe didn't flood in the beginning starts to flood a little, then floods more, and now more floods are flooding, more houses are flooding, and finally, all the houses are flooding because you've displaced so much of the natural floodplain. There's simply no more areas for the water to go. So flipping through those things that I addressed, the causes and the reasons that we're here tonight, how do we address flooding? Well, we look at each one of those causes and we try to address it. So you can address urban and suburban development, but primarily you do that through regulation, through planning and zoning, wetlands, and other regulatory bodies that will have an impact in the future, but aren't necessarily going to change anything today. And the other challenge with that I should mention too, is a lot of the water that comes from out of town, from communities from the north, you would need to have support from those communities as well, because water doesn't respect municipal boundaries. So if there's a communities to the north that are highly developed and they're sending a lot of water downstream, that has to be a team effort with everyone involved. Aging and undersized stormwater infrastructure, this should absolutely be something that every community is addressing and has on their radar, and that involves going through and having an inventory of their infrastructure townwide and understanding where things need to be fixed, the same way you would do road paving and say, this particular area is up for reinvestment, and then you have a cycle, and your public works department would just continue to do that, as I'm sure that they do. Again, this is something that's not going to fix things today, but it can incrementally fix things. The other thing to consider with this is that as you have an inundated river such as the Rooster River, where flooding is so rampant, if you start incrementally fixing flooding problems way up in the upper portions of the watershed, you could be making it worse for those downstream. There's a finite amount of volume of water, and if it's not flooding one area, it's potentially flooding somewhere else. So the same thing applies for undersized roadways, bridges, and culverts. Increasing the size of these will make them less prone to debris blockages, like the image that Bill showed you earlier, but it also could worsen things downstream. Increasing precipitation severity, we can't really do too much about. The thing that we can do about it, as I started to mention, was that engineering practice is starting to catch up. Back when I started my career in 2005, we were still designing this. Connecticut DOT was still designing things based on precipitation data that was captured from 1942 to like the 1980s. So that was historic data, and as we know, things have been changing. The engineering practice has evolved since then, thankfully, and we are actually now looking at future projections and trying to look at the vast wealth of data that we have and extrapolating where that data is leading us. So if you design a bridge that has a 100-year service life, we're now designing things to accommodate what's going to happen in 100 years, not for what was happening 100 years ago. And the fifth and the final contributing factor, which is why we're here, is the encroachment of the floodplain. So a lot of urban communities have this problem. It's all throughout New England and old post-industrial mill towns. Many of these rivers were encroached on. But that also leads to the lack of available real estate to reclaim any of these floodplain areas. So instead of being able to reclaim floodplain areas, we're looking at detention, which serves a very similar purpose. So I just wanted to run through a couple quick examples to illustrate what I'm talking about. This is West Hartford. This is Trout Brook. It goes right through the center of downtown West Hartford. And this is one of those concrete line channels I was talking about that the Army Corps loved to do right after the flood of 1955 all throughout the state. But they were finding that the concrete channel was overtopping because precipitation was increasing, and they had sized it for old data. So what they did in the 80s and 90s, they hired Malone and McBroom to look at creative solutions to fixing this, and this is what they came up with. They widened out that channel, got rid of all the concrete, and made a naturalized floodplain, right? So you have the bank, they call the bank full channel, which is sort of a sunny day stream that you see every day. But then you create that floodplain, that vegetated floodplain that allows for the water to expand out and harmlessly flood an area versus harmfully flooding a downtown area. It's been wildly successful. It's worked great for years. They've had, they've mitigated all of the flooding that was happening in downtown. I thought that was a relevant example because I know that there are portions of the Rooster River that look a lot like that. Another example that jumped to my mind was in downtown Meriden. This is the Harbor Brook, the site of Harbor Brook. It's a former mall, and there were residential and commercial buildings scattered around, but it's just, I mean, you could see it's a sea of pavement. And they had nothing but flooding problems for years and years. The Harbor Brook, you can't see it, but it's underground along this blue line with 2 tributaries that come in, and it's just it's a half a mile long of culverts of various sizes and shapes and configurations and ages that were just built up over time. So the city was interested in daylighting this whole area and creating a detention area and a floodplain area that could absorb some of that flood volume and allow it to help areas downstream in other portions of the city. So that's what we did. MMI was the lead designer on this, and they finished it. It was a $4.4 million project. They finished it 3 years ago. This is what it looks like today. They took the opportunity of having this flood detention area to make it into a green public space. That's a park that, most of the time is fine. Most of the time is dry, but they just put up the signs and they made it so that it was resilient to flooding, so that in the instance of a severe flood coming through, people would be notified. It would be safe for people to safely leave, and it would flood, and then the floodwaters would recede, and then they can just continue using it a day or two later. I thought this was a relevant example because not only is it basically what we're talking about here when we say detention, but it's also the Rooster River watershed has a number of areas where segments of it are below ground, and we're going to talk about some of those tonight. So those 2 options are great, but the thing that those both require is undeveloped space. And this is an image of the Rooster River watershed in both the yellow line being the town boundary between Fairfield and Bridgeport. And you can see there's just not a lot of undeveloped space. So that leads us to our detention feasibility study. So given the constraints of space, 7 sites were identified by the town Fairfield to us to say, we'd like you to look at these sites and see if detention makes sense at any of them. On the slide, I say 6 sites. One of them was found not to be something that we wanted to pursue further. The cost-benefit ratio didn't make sense on that particular site, and it did not have an impact on flooding. The other 6 we think could. So just to give you this is a quick fly video. I don't know how it's going to work over the internet. Hopefully it's something that does work for you depending on your internet speed. But this will just show you where those 6 sites are located, starting at Ash Creek at Long Island Sound and going upstream. Kind of zooming around here, we see these blue waves where flooding was reported during September 25th. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's just some of what we have. We've got Site 1 is Tunxus Hill Park on the left, and Site 2 is the Algonquin Road area. They're highlighted in red, I don't think I mentioned. Site 3 is the Melville Playground. Going up along Stratfield Road, we see a lot of flooding that was reported. Site 4 is Lieutenant Owen Fish Park. Trying to speak too quickly. Flooding in the Bennett Bond area. Site 5 is Woodfield Village, and then Site 6 is Fairchild Wheeler Country Club. So what I think we're going to do now is I'm going to hand it over to Jay Williams, who's a landscape architect with MMI, and he's going to just briefly go through each of those sites and some of the elements that we've developed in our concept.
Thanks, Jim. Again, my name is Jason Williams. I'm a principal landscape architect with Mylone and Mac Broom. I just want to walk through some of the elements of our concepts for the stormwater management that Jim had talked about on these sites, starting with Tunxus Hill Park. We understand that there is significant flooding within the area of residential homes on Nordstrand Avenue, Villa Place, and Melville Avenue. There are 4 tributaries that head north and east through the wooded area that you can see in the lower left-hand corner. And these tributaries combine in a pipe which runs on the western portion of the field here, through the pipe underneath the field where you can see we have the X's, and continues out to the roadway. Essentially, what happens is these tributaries overwhelm the existing pipe networks, and the surcharging water then backs up and overflows across the athletic fields, down Nordstrom Avenue and Villa Place, and into driveways and yards and homes along Villa Avenue until it recombines with the tributary downstream. And so what's one option that we can do to really limit this flooding? Well, if we could go back for one sec there. So as you can see in blue, reconfiguring the stream channels so that they move to the south and all tie in to a new outlet control structure. This is a large box that essentially takes all the storm water into it, and with a high level overflow, then discharges out underground into the center of the field into a new junction box. But with all of the water in these tributaries coming down and flooding the field, we've got to detain it. So as you can see in green, we have a berm which runs from the northwest to the southeast and really holds back a lot of that water. In blue, you can see a proposed detention area, which is about 1.7 acres. So it's a substantial area within the woodland that would detain the water. Once this area is detained, goes into the goes into the outlet control structure, into the junction chamber under the ground. It would continue out onto Nordstrom Avenue underground in a pipe. Using the existing pipe is what we're currently showing, but further analysis may prove that we'd have to provide potential upgrades to that pipe. Next. So from a drone aerial view, you can see on the bottom we've got Nordstrom Avenue, and we're looking west, and you can see the athletic fields and everything that I just explained. Our berm, which is running on the left-hand side, just outside of the field of play. So I think that's important. In all of our concepts, none of our improvements are impacting any of the athletic fields of play. The berm holding back the detained water, everything going into the outlet structure, pipe underground, and then out to Nordstrom. Next slide. In order to maintain this berm, which would be vegetated with plants and also serve a dual purpose as almost bleacher seating, we would install a stone dust maintenance access road so that the area could be weed whacked. We limit any invasive plants that are growing on it. We keep the existing chain link fence that identifies the limits of the athletic field and potentially plant some nice shade trees along Nordstrom Avenue. Next. So Algonquin Road is our next site. This is a privately owned parcel between Villa Avenue and Algonquin Road. This was identified as a possible candidate for the creation of a detention area. Why? Because the parcel is located just upstream of where the same tributary that flows through Tunxus Hill Park and discharges into the Rooster River lies. The parcel currently is undeveloped. It's mainly forested woodland. Now, significant roadway flooding occurs along Algonquin Road, and while there are 2 existing catch basins, the one on the right and in the center, that does take storm waters, underground in 2 existing pipes and discharges them into this open woodland area, we would be looking at a couple of things. One, potentially identifying the need to increase sizing of the catch basins or the pipes, and then adding an additional catch basin and pipe on the left-hand side to take on some of the flooding on Algonquin Road. Once all of the stormwater goes through these pipes and enters the woodland, we'd be daylighting the pipes into open channels and creating depressional areas, as you can see with the dashed lines, to further detain some of the water. Water would continue to the south and enter the culvert under Villa Road and onto Rooster River. Melville Playground is an important site. It's owned by the town. It's located along an unnamed tributary of the Rooster River. Roadway drainage from Little Brook Road, as you can see on the left, discharges just to the north of the park or the baseball fields, and the water course runs to the northeast along essentially the border of the baseball field. In heavy rains, we've got a lot of flooding in this area, and so we want to hold back the water, again, with the installation of a berm to detain approximately 3/4 of an acre of water with the one main tributary heading down into the south. That all tie into an outlet control structure, as you can see in the cream color, with a pipe underneath the berm that then spills out to the northeast. Next. So here's an aerial view, again, looking to the northeast of Melville Playground. And you can see the berm, which is running just along the edge of the baseball field, that also could double, as I said, again, as almost bleacher seating. There could be a walkway on top of it, but the berm really helps to detain all of this water in the forested wetland and controlled through the outlet structure. Next. This perspective view is also looking to the northeast and shows what that potential berm could look like. Based on this project and the hydraulic analysis that we'll be doing in the future, we wanted to show 2 options that identify different volumes of water that we can hold back so that we can show that, maybe this berm wants to be 4 feet in height with seating and a walkway on top of it, or maybe this berm really needs to be more in the range of 7 feet tall. Lieutenant Owens Fish Park, again, owned by the town, and located on London's Brook, which is another tributary of Rooster River. Currently, it flows beneath the larger baseball diamond at the top of the image in 2 6-foot wide by 3.5-foot high pipes. So it's taking on a tremendous amount of water. This site is very important because providing detention at this site really has the potential to decrease the overall flows in the Rooster River watershed because it's located in the upper third portion of the Rooster River watershed. And lowering these flows really are going to benefit all of the properties that are located downstream in the floodplain of London's Brook. As part of this project, we'd also be proposing a berm, as you can see, at the edges of the athletic play area, so the berm won't impact any play. The installation of the berm holds back, it detains the water, and you can see the limit of flooding that would encompass this area. But also more importantly, as I mentioned before, and if you can see on the left-hand side, there's a very large tree on the corner. And it's from this area that these underground pipes continue along the roadway there. What we'd be proposing to do is to open up that channel, similar to what Jim showed in Meriden with the Meriden Green, but on a much smaller level. If we can get the water out of these pipes, let it branch out into kind of a micro stream with micro floodplains, herbaceous plantings, pollinator species planted, boulders for kids to sit on, we're not only providing a stormwater element but we're also really creating a placemaking element. So families that are watching ball games, kids are sitting on the sides of the streams, there's butterflies moving through. With this open channel that moves into the lower London's brook. Once flooded, you can see the proposed outlet control structure, very similar to previous projects, that would then be piped in a high-level overflow through the berm and into London's brook. Another view of this from the roadway looking southwest, you can see that daylighted existing channel on the bottom of the page and the open channel running along the side there and the sidewalk. I mean, really kind of beautiful element for even driving along the roadway, walking on the sidewalk, and how that continues down to the outlet structure and then further down to London's brook, which is also daylighted. This is a perspective view. On the left-hand side, you can see the branches that are coming down from that large tree in the roadway on the left, baseball field on the right, and really just a quick sketch of that open channel with stones and boulders to sit on, and the proposed detention area with the berm in the background at the edge of the woodland. Woodfield Village is our fifth site. This is a condominium development that actually includes a lot of detention basins throughout the site. Most of the detention basins are in forested woodlands, and they are controlled by 12-foot by 12-foot concrete outlet structures that have a sluice gate in them. These sluice gates are mainly left open in accordance with the original engineering design that was done with them. This concept proposes to increase the detention at one or maybe more based on our hydraulic analysis that really would include just very slight modifications to the actual structure, as you can see in cream, no monumental structural changes. As you can see in green, there's an existing earthen berm here. As part of this project, heading to the north of this berm, we would install a 12-foot high, small little berm. Really, the main reason for this is to protect that one home there. We obviously go back.
Sorry, Jay, I didn't mean to do that. I did want to just clarify that would be a 12-inch berm.
Oh, did I say 12 feet? Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Yeah, so, just a small little berm to further detain the area. And you can see the area of detention. It's approximately 1 acre. So it is a pretty large area. But also just on the southern side of that, we would be installing a small little, what we call an emergency bypass channel, which is nothing more than a small little stream with plantings around it that acts almost as a pressure release valve when the detention area does fill up. We're providing an area for this water to release and continue down and tie into the brook. Fairchild Wheeler Country Club is our last site. Most people on the call probably are familiar with the country club. It's actually located in Bridgeport. Property is located at the headwaters of London Brook. It's directly upstream of Bennett Street and Bond Street, where severe flooding has occurred. Additionally, there's flooding that occurs on residences on Casimir Drive. As part of this project, we'd be looking along this southern property line here to install a new berm just to the right of that to tie an existing drainage swale just behind that berm into another outlet control structure, which you can see in the cream color. So as you can see, moving through the golf course is this existing stream where cart paths do traverse over. And at the very top of the page, an existing, or what was once a pond that has filled in with sediments. It's got invasive plants in it. And so kind of Stage one is cleaning this out, getting all the muck out of there, getting rid of the invasives, and using this small area as a detention pond, but also planting it with a riparian buffer so it does have some habitat value and aesthetic value as you're driving on the cart path just to the north of it. With the installation of the berm, you can see we've got a significant area, almost 4 acres, and then another 3 acres, almost 7 acres of detention of the stream channel that really just ties into the existing contours within the golf course. I think we have an area of this aerial, right. So here you can see just a side view, and on the right-hand side, this berm, which is running along the property lines of the residential homes on Casimir Drive, the outlet structure, which is taking in all of the waters coming down, and the potential limits of flooding and proposed detention area. This picture is actually taken from the back of those residential properties on Casimir Drive looking into the golf course, and you can see a representation of that berm holding back the detained water and planted with various types of native vegetation. Jim?
All right. Jay, are you all set?
I'm all set, thanks.
Excellent, thank you. That was great. So I was going to jump back in and I have two more slides, and then I'll hand it back over to Bill to kind of let you guys know what the next steps are here. So those are the projects we've come up with from a conceptual perspective. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, okay, well, what is this actually going to do for my home, my business, where I live? How much is this going to impact flooding? And the answer is all of these projects have the potential to help quite a bit. And we did do sort of a screening level analysis to determine that that's the case. But we don't have the details here at this conceptual design stage to be able to answer a lot of those detailed questions. We're here for you today to present what we've got, to get your input, and to take all that input to bring these projects to the next level. Because the engineering analysis to answer that question that, this project will help flooding at this address by 9 inches or whatever is very, very complex, and it relies on the details of that design. And as you can see, the most detail that we have are these renderings and sketches, of which we have no actual engineering data. So I wanted to just mention that, and I wanted to show this slide because I know another question you may have is, at Lieutenant Owen Fish Park, where we're proposing a detention system that utilizes some of the outfield, how often is that going to flood? So the answer to that is, again, we don't know yet because we need to make that decision together. We need to have some input from the community. Depending on how often it is made to flood based on the design, there will be more benefit downstream. And so it's sort of a balancing act that needs to be weighed. In this completely theoretical example that I pulled, this is the last 365 days of rainfall in Fairfield. And I drew an orange line, horizontal line at the 0.9-inch mark to illustrate what would happen if we designed this detention basin to flood every time we get 0.9 inches or more of rain. If that happened to be the case, this timeline, and unfortunately I had to break it into 2 sections to fit on the slide, but starting on the left, laser pointer, that's neat. Starting on the left on October 30th, 2019, these red boxes indicate times where the water would have been out onto the floodplain or into the outfield of Lieutenant Owen Fish Park if this was the design. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instances through March and another 5 through the rest of the year, so 10 instances in that year. Obviously, every year is different. I also tried to illustrate the duration of that rainfall by about a day or 2, depending upon, again, design details, but we could look at options such as under drains beneath the outfield to allow the water to escape more quickly, and we have some other options. But this is just a hypothetical just to sort of illustrate what kind of thing we're talking about. And I mentioned that we did sort of a screening level analysis, just to give you a little more of an idea of what that means. This is the result of that analysis. So we sort of looked at the 10-year flood as a litmus for if we can detain 10% of the 10-year flood with how much volume is available on a site, then that probably will make sense financially and will have an appreciable benefit to continue looking at. If an area was too small to detain that much, then typically the cost of constructing anything there would not achieve an appreciable benefit. And that was the case at one site, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation. We also looked at the infiltration ability, the permeability of the soils. So nice sandy soils that are going to accept water more quickly is obviously something good. Areas with clay and muck and a lot of silt in the ground do not infiltrate as well. So that was a consideration. We looked at the potential of the land use of that site. So Lieutenant Owen Fish Park is a good example where there is potential impacts that we would have to mitigate with the construction of any project there. Again, and we looked at the potential for flood mitigation. And we also looked at the regulated resource impacts. So that's wetlands, forested wetlands, things that might pose a problem when we go to the permitting aspect of this project from Connecticut DEP or the Army Corps who may have concerns. Those are sort of the parameters that we use to get to this level. And so that is a summary of where we are. That's a summary of how we got here, what we've done to date, and the projects that we have come up as potential concept ideas for you. I'm going to hand it back over to Bill, and then I think he'll give you an idea of where we're going, and then we're going to open up the floor after that. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Everyone can hear me, I hope? Okay. Just wanted to mention the last two sites that were mentioned, Woodfield Village Condos and the Fairchild Wheeler Golf Course. I just have to, again, put in perspective that both of these properties are not owned by the town of Fairfield. And so we would have to obviously work with those owners to hopefully they'll see the benefits of their the project. Hopefully they'll receive some benefits from flooding as well. And, you know, we'll have to go forward. But I just wanted to, again, highlight that those two areas are not owned by the town. And we will obviously, as further design criteria comes down and gets developed, we will certainly be working with those entities. We've done some preliminary talks. I've talked to a couple of people at the condos, but not officially. And obviously, we've been working with the city of Bridgeport a couple of times. We met at the site, and they seem to be on board because obviously detention at any of these spots will eventually also help people that live in the city of Bridgeport that are along the Rooster River as well. And then just in case anyone was wondering, the other site that was investigated, but it was deemed not feasible, was the Brook Lawn Country Club. Again, we were looking at larger parcels where perhaps we could do these detention ponds or detention areas and try to get some benefit. But that one didn't even show a 1% increase, a 1% decrease. And so it just wasn't feasible, just in case anyone was wondering. Again, to highlight that, please visit the project website. And on one of these, we have a survey that supports your comments or questions. If you can fill out, I think there are the story maps. Malone Broom can go into a little bit more detail of that, the survey. The town and project team will consult to determine which projects and revisions will be implemented. As I mentioned before, we'll have at least one more, probably a couple more public meetings to present the results, one with Malone and Broom and perhaps smaller ones with the neighborhood and the towns. We're hoping to have some of those scheduled later in the winter or the spring maybe of 2021. And the town will continue to also seek potential grants and solicit funding for project implementation. Obviously, having neighborhood support should and usually does increase the potential of getting grants or funding. So certainly if people voice their opinions or support, or if they want further information before they make a decision, obviously that's what we're here to do. And we will, as I said, at the next public meeting, hopefully we'll have a lot more detail to give people. In closing, the implementation of the storage, which would be the next slide, it will help safely collect floodwaters in a controlled manner. The more space or volume created, the less water that would flood homes, businesses, and properties downstream. But obviously, the larger the detention area, you know, we have to be cognizant of property concerns, and obviously we don't want to impact the fields or any of the properties either. So it's going to be a balancing act, and what the consultants have proposed so far, I think are at this stage of the game realistic, and we'll have hopefully a good chance of getting permitted and getting constructed. In almost every case of these detention areas or the proposals, I believe every property in the watershed will at least receive some benefit from flooding. Obviously, certain properties will get a little bit more than others, depending on the exact location. But unlike just increasing pipe sizes and you know, where you can bomb out people downstream, the detention areas pull back the water, let it go at a slower rate, and usually benefit anybody downstream. So that's the concept that the town and our consultants are looking at. And the consultants and I will stay after the presentation here to answer any questions you might have. And I'll bring it back to Noah, the moderator, to maybe he can read off some of the chats or see if we have any questions that we can answer.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so we'll open things up to questions now. The preferred way for you to ask questions is by typing them into the chat. That'll just help us make sure that we can keep track of all the questions and get to all of them. So if you're able to type your question into the chat box, then that's great. If for some reason you're not able to use the chat box or aren't able to get your question across, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there should be a button that says participants. If you click the participants button, then on the bottom left, there'll be a little raise hand symbol. I see that Kristen has found it. So you click that and we'll get around to you as we try to go through. So while people type in questions or start raising their hands, I'll just note, so Greg asked a couple of questions, which Bill just addressed those questions. There was one question about assuming that we plan on being compliant with FEMA's zero rise in the floodway requirements. I don't know if anybody has a specific answer for that.
Well, we'd have to meet the FEMA regulatory. When we apply for the permits, they'll go to our local conservation department, and they'll probably go also to the Army Corps of Engineers and the Connecticut DEEP. Usually, they have a requirement very similar to the FEMA, and so I would have to say yes, that would be answered. And obviously, we were talking about applying for grants. Whatever grant we apply to, one of which could be a FEMA grant, we would obviously have to meet all the FEMA criteria. So that's the best way I could answer that.
I'll jump in just quickly and say typically those requirements are in place to ensure that any kind of encroachment or development in a floodplain or floodway doesn't impact negatively an insurable property. And in this case, all these designs have been carefully scripted not to do that and to only affect open space. So even if there is a flood, I think some of these tributaries are so small that they're not mapped. But even if they are mapped and we do need to modify the floodplain mapping accordingly to the project, FEMA is typically pretty amenable to that, given that you're trying to impart a benefit.
Thanks. So next question from Keith Bradley. And actually, I'll note as I'm doing this, if you have on Zoom your name, then that's great. We can see who's asking the question. But if your name is either not given with Zoom or is not necessarily who you are, if you're using somebody else's Zoom account, if you can just type your name with your question, that'll help us. So Keith asks, what is the status of debris in the Rooster River now?
Keith, sorry I don't have the answer for that. If anybody has that answer or they want to, take pictures, again, one of the things to keep in mind is certain parts of the Rooster River are privately owned. They're not owned by the town. Other parts that, we might have trouble having access to. The best thing for anybody to do, especially if you get a warning. This storm from 2 years ago, I remember I got a 1 minute warning before, a huge downpour came regarding a warning on my phone for that. But unlike, if there's a hurricane or a nor'easter that come by and it says, oh, potential flooding or whatever, to clean up or make, don't have a habit of putting all your leaves right on the top of the berm or the dike where, they could easily fall into the river. Or if you cut down a tree, just leaving it overhang the riverbank or whatever. Eventually, those could be problems to the town or to your neighborhood. And that's the best advice I could ask people on that aspect. If something is blocking a culvert or the town can have easy access, like that one picture where we showed all that crash debris right by that culvert. Yes, the town can come in and clean that. But, there are some other spots where the town won't be able to, we won't have access and we won't be able to do it legally. So anytime you can maintain your own, and if if we have 100 people along the river that maintain and try to keep the area clean, then the next time we do get a big storm, all that debris, or at least less debris, will be washed down and block culverts and pipes. So that's my advice. And Keith, certainly, if COVID finally ends, whether it be spring or summer, and you want to organize another a cleanup, let me know. And as I said, the town can get involved and try to help you out that way. Thank you.
All right. So Kristen has a question, so I will ask her to unmute.
I saw Bill smile when I'm State Rep Kristen McCarthy-Behe, and Bill and I have been talking about the Rooster River for over 15 years, I guess, Bill, and many people before me. So thank you all very much for this presentation. I have 3 questions, and I'll put them all out there and you can answer them. One is about the Trumbull Mall and conversations with Trumbull and the folks up there. I know there's been some condo conversation, and I'm wondering if you guys have had any conversation with them as that development begins to take shape, which I know isn't directly related necessarily, but could impact what downstream, obviously. The second is, you mentioned FEMA grants as one possibility. I'm wondering what other funding sources you're thinking about, Bill. And finally, the third question is, how many of these detention sites is this project going for? Is it going for one of the sites? Is the ideal? Obviously, funding will impact that, but what would be your ideal as you start out?
Okay. The first question, I'm trying to remember the order of them, but the first question regarding was it the mall? Was that your first question, or was there one before that? Okay.
And
the mall. Yeah. We have worked with the city of Trumbull. Did alert us that the project was coming forward for approvals. The town of Fairfield and the city of Bridgeport wrote letters saying that we wanted to make sure that Trumbull was being extra, careful in their analysis, and they even shared the consultant's design and calculations. We looked over them, and to be honest with you, we had a little problem with them. They went back. They had to revise the drainage report, and then we asked for anywhere from 5 to 20% of a decrease in runoff. They were able to make their quote models work. So I think it was somewhere between 5 and 10 of a reduction at least. So we did get something. The flow rates I think were lower, and then the volume I think was at 5% reduction. But that's going forward, and certainly the actual mall. This was a vacant property that was next to the mall. If the mall goes for redevelopment, they are definitely aware of the impacts, and the town of Fairfield and the city of Bridgeport will also be involved in any reviews, or we'll be able to, through public comment, seek on that. And to the zoning board's credit, they did give us that platform, and we were able to submit our comments. That aspect of working together, I think, is important. And if there are any other grants, there's certain ones, like I'll give you an example of the LOTSIP grant, that involves transportation. This is, flood mitigation. I tried one time to get a grant for Stratfield Road, figuring, well, that's a transportation, it's a state highway, but they deemed it ineligible. They were saying, again, that it was really a drainage project, not a transportation project. But we keep on, looking for it. Fish and Wildlife, Save the Sound sometimes have some grants. And we are constantly looking for any potential grants. And certainly, I do have 2 letters of support from Trumbull and the city of Bridgeport that if we ever do apply for a grant, that they support our grant application. And we would do the same for them as well, because obviously any detention ponds in the Rooster River watershed that occur in Trumbull are going to benefit the residents of Fairfield and Bridgeport. So we're really trying to work together and try to resolve the problem. What were some of your other ones? I'm trying to remember.
The last one was how many sites you're going for, and I guess, okay. And Jerry, I see Jerry Demner's asking the same kind of. Okay. I know budget impacts that, but obviously, what I'm thinking about right now is how to help get the funding for this project. That's why I'm asking this. How can I start as you guys are doing this planning and support you in that? So that the other piece was how many of those out of 6.
Well, one of the first things I want to mention is I did put in an intent to file a FEMA grant. It was under our understanding that they were due January 30th. Unfortunately, that was when the state, I guess, had to submit them. We had to put them in by November 30th. The announcement, I think, was only made maybe a month ago, so it wasn't like a delay on our part by any means. With that in mind, though, when you go for a FEMA grant, they really want to see people taken out of the flood zone. A lot of these homes that did get flooded, if they looked at either flood insurance or they looked at what they call the FEMA flood maps, they were located in the 100-year floodplain. So there's always, and no matter what year, there's always that 1% chance that these areas would get flooded. Well, FEMA likes us to take them completely out of the floodplain. So the best way to do that would be to do these detention ponds or detention areas and try to lower the release of the runoff. And so therefore, some places, that got flooded 6 feet now maybe only get flooded 1 foot. They're not going to qualify as a FEMA takeout until it's 0. And this is my belief. But there's other ones where it's 4 inches, they're in, and now they'll be out. We can take credit for that. And so every house that we take, or every property, I should say, we take out, we can call that a benefit. Then they weigh it upon the cost of the project, and you have to have at least a benefit, a BCA, I think they call it, a benefit of over 1, but they really like to see 2 or 3 because these are very competitive grants. And we have the potential for a $1 to $10 million grant regarding for FEMA projects. So we are going to try to apply for the ones that we feel are going to be necessary. Like, for instance, we brought up the Algonquin one. That's not a detention area. That's going to be a localized one. I don't think that that's going to qualify for FEMA. But the Fairchild Wheeler one, perhaps the Woodfield Village, there's some other ones that would or potentially could be eligible. And then what the town has to feel, and certainly if anyone has any comments to it, certainly it would help, is because I have a capital planning workshop coming up in December with the Board of Finance. And this project for funding at least is going to be presented to see, what year perhaps they will be able to fund it. Regarding that, the main thing there is that in order to demonstrate how many homes get taken out of the FEMA, that's going to require more engineering analysis. That's something that we did not hire Malone and McBroom to do. They do have the capability of doing it. A real quick, estimate would say be in the $100,000 range. So then we'd have to say to the town, is it worth spending $100,000 to maybe get $400,000, $600,000, $800,000 of grant money, for this? It also means that we'd probably have to wait, another 6 or 8 months. Whenever you apply for a grant, there's always paperwork involved and all that. So those are the things that we'll have to weigh. I will be bringing that up to the town officials and to the Board of Finance. You guys are the first ones to hear it, so the benefits of attending these meetings, I guess. And then, go from there. But that's what we're trying to do, is we're really trying to balance costs and benefits. The consultants have given us very preliminary cost estimates. If we were to do them all, we're probably looking at around the $2 million range for all of them. But again, that could go down if we find that some of the permits might not be necessary, or that we can somehow, if you get the, one detention area and then another one downstream, maybe you get double, bang for the buck, then you might be able to save that way. So these are just, as I said, preliminary cost estimates. Obviously, when they do their next stage, they'll give us some, more updated costs on that. And as far as, they all have a benefit, but they could all be separate too. In other words, we could lump them all as a package of 6 detention areas, or we can say, pick 1 or 2 at a time. If that's what the Board of Finance or the town officials feel that, let's not, do them all at once. Let's do a couple at a time here or there. Then that might be the approach. Obviously, if we were to get grant money and we can get the whole ball of wax somehow, or whatever ones are qualified, then I think that increases our chances of getting funding approval as well. I hope that answers the question.
My gosh, thank you, Bill. And I'm here to support in whatever way I can.
Right, thanks.
Thanks. So I'll go on to the next question. We got a few more that popped up. So Josh asked, does the conceptual plan for Algonquin include detention basins on the private property? He thought you said it did, but then he saw a note saying it didn't. So looking for clarification on that.
I could jump in. So we did, that was one of the sites that we looked at originally for detention. It's basically a wetland now. It's a forested wetland. The groundwater is quite high. And we felt that excavating down into that wetland area, not even counting all of the regulatory issues that might come with something like that. You know, the area that we would want to use for detention might just fill up with water. In order for a detention area to be effective, it has to be dry before the rain starts. If there's water already there, that's just volume that's not going to be used for detention. So we actually ruled it out as a detention site, but due to the nature of Algonquin Road to the north and having some more localized flooding that's, I think, more attributable to roadway flooding, we did just throw some ideas out there to reroute and reconnect some of the catch basins in that roadway to a more proper discharge area and like some bioswales and things in some little mini detention areas, not detention on the scale that we've been talking about with the other projects.
Yeah, I'll just jump in also as well with the Algonquin. Those pipe systems are from pretty much the WPA days, you know, during the Depression. So they are from the 1930s. They're kind of oblong or oval pipes. They have a capacity of maybe, I think there's one that's a 13 by 21 and another one that's a 15-inch. And so we'd be looking at, as the plan showed, maybe constructing a new pipe or a new section to get it away from the homes and then let it daylight where it can eventually reach the Rooster River. We did find through one of our analysis that there's a unique chamber where one of these pipes, for whatever reason we don't know, went into a square manhole and then into another section. And, you know, when our contractor did clean out the pipes, that little manhole section did have, just as we were talking about before, a couple of tree branches. There was some debris, and so if you only have a 15-inch pipe that's draining the area and 8 or 10 inches of it's kind of clogged, that's really hurting your chances. So at least now we've had the pipes cleaned out professionally, and you know, at least there's some benefit there. But as mentioned before, with this proposal to maybe daylight the pipes, sometimes that's better. The water will get there with less chance of obstruction. Just wanted to let everybody know.
Great. All right, so Ray has some questions, specifically concerns regarding the Woodfield Village site. So there are 3 of them, so I'll read those to you guys. So first, there is a very steep unnatural slope along the west side of the proposed retention area. Erosion already occurs from a roadway down toward the detention area. Second, Paisley Lane homes are very low-lying, which is why you would need thus the 12-inch berm, but water so close to backyards and basements on a regular basis needs serious consideration. And 3, what happens to the emergency bypass if it clogs with debris? Let me know if you want me to repeat any of those.
So yeah, no, those are all good points. A lot of those are things that we would take into consideration in a more advanced detail design stage. You know, localized erosion coming from the parking lot could certainly be addressed during any kind of a modification or design there. We still don't even really understand how it was originally designed. You know, it could be that, and I haven't personally, I'll admit, haven't been there during a flood to see it in operation. So we don't know if it's filling up daily or if it's filling up every 10 years. You know, we just don't know. So part of really what we want to do is figure that out and establish what it's doing today and just see if there is room to have it fill more frequently. And when we say having it fill to the top, to the tippy top of that 12-inch berm or to the emergency spillway, that's, no matter what the design would ever be, that's still going to be the extreme event. It's called an emergency spillway because it's for the emergencies. It's for the 500-year floods that occur, and so we wouldn't ever propose anything that would jeopardize nearby homes by having water flooding them when it didn't before. I mean, that defeats the whole purpose of this entire analysis. But those are absolutely good concerns and well heard. So.
Yeah, and then one other thing I would add is certainly if anybody, you know, has pictures of an area that was flooded or whatever, and you can tell us what storm it was, if you can remember, or what year it was. That always helps, because then it makes sure that our models are up to date and check with that. And so in the case here, if the water was getting very high to the homes, that would be something that we'd want to know. But we'd also have to investigate it if we can a little bit further, because again, it might have been due to some clogging, or it might have been that the weir or the outlet structure might have been locked in a certain position. I don't know full details, but that's something that, as I said, we can investigate further. And as always, any additional information people have is always.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'll echo that. If there are any residents here on the call, Ray, if you have some photos or any further description of how you've observed that to operate, that's all great information. And if you could pass that on to Bill, who can relay it to us, that would be very great to have. So appreciate that.
Great. So Jerry asked about budget, and I think we addressed that earlier. Jerry, let me know in the chat if we didn't get to anything specific there. But I'll move on to Greg asked, am I correct in my understanding that the Trumbull Mall is in the Horse Tavern Brook watershed? Its confluence is at Brooklawn Avenue, just south of Villa Avenue, so the runoff from the mall wouldn't impact Stratfield or North Stratfield. Is that correct?
I do know that the Trumbull Mall does go down. I'd have to look at our watershed map. I do know it eventually flows into the Rooster River. As far as North Stratfield, that might be correct. North Stratfield, that's the that was London's Brook. The Horse Tavern Brook is the one that goes by the golf course. So the one by Woodfield Village, that area and that part of North Stratfield, that wouldn't, the mall would not affect that. But lower, the Lynbrook area, Villa Avenue area, all that from the mall does get to the Rooster River. Yeah.
Okay. And then we have a question from Representative Jay Woke, who says, of District 5, so if these projects get done, what will stop the flooding? Oh, sorry. If these projects get done, will that stop the flooding down Stratfield Road? He shares a story. He was stuck on Stratfield Road during a rainstorm. He had to turn around and go back to Cornell to get to Melville Road to get home in Dogwood Green.
So any of the detention areas that do get advanced through further, through these public engagements, through advanced design, through funding, permitting, and constructed, are going to help areas downstream. So the Stratfield Road area is sort of in front of Lieutenant Owen Fish Park. So really the only two that are going to have significant impacts that area would be Woodfield Village and would be Fairchild Wheeler. Lieutenant Owen Fish Park could have an impact on areas of the road downstream from it, but the other three sites that we mentioned wouldn't have any benefit to that area.
So those are all the questions that I have in the chat. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss anything.
And just going back even to a lot of these, as I said, the detention areas, I think, as I said, almost everybody benefits, depending on how many we build, where they, how detailed more the design becomes, and what's ultimately constructed, will make a difference. I can't say that when we build these that nobody will ever experience any flooding. We just don't know that for sure, obviously. But the more we build, the more we hold back, it certainly reduces the chances of flooding. and I think it does it for the most part in an environmental friendly way. What we haven't gone even talk about is that with these detention ponds, if you even store back a little bit, say maybe during a 1-year event, there is definitely some water quality benefits to the watershed as well. So not just from a flooding standpoint, but from an environmental standpoint, we could see a benefit that way as well.
Thanks. So we got a couple more questions from Margaret. How far apart are the contour lines on the Woodfield Village map? I don't know if you know off the top of your head what those are.
Don't know off the top of my head. I can, in the background here, I can try to answer that question.
Okay, so take your time looking that up. Jay Woke says there's one other Fairfield Woods road that goes into Dogwood Green that needs to be cleaned of debris. That's you know.
That one, I believe, is private. We can double check that. I know Jay and I have had discussions about that one. And even the Dogwood Green condominium has been investigating ways to try to reduce their maintenance costs for the debris, dredging of their little pond there that they have in the back. One of the good news is that both the state and the town have basically gone to the salt type of solution opposed to sediment and sand. And so therefore, we're not getting as much sand in the catch basin, so to speak, at least from the snow removal operation. And so that's helped with maintenance costs.
So I can briefly share my screen. I've brought up the rendering for Woodfield Village again. Hopefully that works. So I was just looking at this area. I think the question was intended to ask what the slope of this berm is. If I'm misinterpreting that, feel free to add some clarification there. But just measuring this slope, which was constructed when the condos were first built, is 2-to-1, which is pretty typical of sort of an earthen berm dam. And it's fairly steep, but it's relatively stable. I haven't been out there for a few years. I recall that it was wooded. There was a lot of debris and wood, down wood on it. Sometimes when they design and build these, they would riprap and stone protect them, especially on the downstream side, which is where there might be more erosion if there was a flood event that would risk overtopping it. Again, not knowing the parameters of how they designed it, there may be even riprap underneath the leaves that we're just not aware of. They may put topsoil over it. We've done that in the past too. So we really want to get our heads into that original design, and certainly any modifications that would be made would be done so with the responsible engineering analysis. It's likely that, given the size of this, if it's not a regulated dam through Connecticut DEP dam safety, then it certainly could or should be, and they have a set of very strict requirements in the alteration to an existing dam. So I wish I had more information on this one for you, but as it stands right now, we just identified it as a possibility. Of the ones we discussed here, to be frank, once we look at that analysis, we could determine that it just doesn't make sense. But it just seemed like an opportunity to at least ask the questions and see if something can be done there.
And Jim, it looks like they're 1-foot contours. Reading some of the labels. Yeah.
The interval is 1 foot. That's correct.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised. There's a comment from Greg pointing out that projects like this are intended to reduce the frequency and intensity of flooding. You can't eliminate flooding completely, and really intense storms, we'll still have some problems.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. It's a good point, Greg. But again, hopefully that, you know, the areas that are flooded, they don't get flooded for as long or as deep. And, you know, in some cases, that might be enough to salvage, you know, furniture or drywall or whatever. In other cases, it still might not matter. It all depends on each individual, you know, location. But he makes a good point. And again, that's what we're all trying to do, is at least reduce the chances. And, you know, if you get flooded every 30 years versus every 3 years, I think everybody would agree that that's at least better than than the latter, if you know what I mean.
I do have a hand now from Margaret, so I'm going to unmute, or ask her to unmute.
Ah, okay. My question is, how deep do you expect the Woodfield area to get at the deepest? Did you?
Yes, we heard you. Thanks. Sorry.
Did you get that?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. I guess
It's an average.
the answer is we don't know, because we don't know what it's doing today. So we really, again, we just don't have a lot of details on that particular concept, but it was just an idea that we should explore, or we recommended that the town be willing to explore a little bit more. And then we probably could answer questions like that, but unfortunately at this time, we just don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, it works out. Right now, we figured it would be 45-minute presentation and 45 minutes for question and answers, and we're within a minute. Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. And as I said, there should be a chance for you to watch the presentation or offer it to anybody that you know who missed it. I'm available for questions or concerns. Just again, keep in mind that this is really just to get everybody updated. We hadn't talked to each other in quite a while, and wanted everybody to have an opportunity to let you know that this wasn't stagnant, that we're moving forward, and certainly we'll take these questions and comments, and hopefully the next time we meet, there'll be a little bit more detailed design, and we can have some more information for you. But as I said before, anything that you can do that you think might help, or suggestions, we're listening. Thank you.
Yeah, and please make sure you get onto the website that's linked through the town's website. Many of you probably came through that link this evening, but there's also a website that MMI that we put together that presents most of the information we went over today. The recording will be available to there as well. But there's also some surveys that you could fill out that ask you, you know, your general feelings towards these projects. There's some opportunities for you to add more comments or concerns, such as some of the ones that came out today. So we definitely encourage you. We'd love to get all your responses in there and roll all of the concerns forward into the next phase. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.